Yeah. Oh, okay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to the webinar today. You're in for a treat hearing from John Dawson, who's one of our Master Gardener volunteers here at the Manatee County Extension Office. My name is Alyssa Vinson, and I'm the residential horticulture agent here in Manatee County. And if you're not familiar with Extension, I just want to give a quick overview of who we are and what we do. We are a program of the University of Florida, which is a land grant university. And our goal as a land grant university, as part of the Cooperative Extension Service, is to take the research that's conducted at the university and distill it and make it relevant and connect it to the people in our communities. And so that's what we're doing here today. Is we're going to have one of our wonderful volunteers who is part of our Master Gardener program, which we have 109 or so Master Gardener volunteers here in Manatee County. They donate over 10,000 hours annually to provide education to our communities. And I know that you're going to learn a lot. And please go ahead and use the Q&A function if you have questions today. And let us know if you need any help in the future. And thanks. Take it away, John.
Thank you. Let me get on here. And there we go. Okay. Good morning, folks. Welcome to the second part of a three-part series we've been giving on herbs in Florida. Today I'm going to be talking really short on the different types of herb gardens that have been growing since the time of the ancient Romans. Spend more time on teaching how to grow herbs, planting, maintenance, and then we're going to give you some information about how to harvest the herbs you've been growing, and then basically storing the herbs you've just harvested. So why bother growing your own herbs in the beginning? I mean, you can just go to the store and buy whatever you need. Well, I went to the store yesterday and there were 3 bundles of herbs, which I considered fresh. And that was one type of cilantro and 2 types of parsley. All the rest of the herbs were bundled in little plastic packages. Well, most people will tell you that if you're going to use herbs for culinary uses or even for medicinal purposes, fresh is always best. So I looked at the fresh bundles and they were grown on a farm in California. So what do you know about the farm? How was that herb actually grown? What kind of chemicals may have been used? And then you had to realize as soon as that herb is picked, it's dying. And the herbs contain essential oils which provide the various types of flavoring and medicinal properties you're looking for. So those essential oils start to deteriorate the moment that plant is picked. So here we are in California, you pick the herbs, you have to bundle them, you have to take them to a transportation center, and somewhere along the line it's transported from California to Florida. Hopefully by plane. If by refrigerated truck, it's going to take a little longer. So it goes to a distribution center, and then from there it goes to your local grocery store. And then it sits on the shelf. How long? No one knows. So just how fresh are those herbs? Now, when you grow your own, you know exactly how they're grown. You go out, you pick the herbs you need when you need it and how much you need. So everything is absolutely fresh and at its peak flavor. So when you go to the store, you're paying for convenience, and you're paying a lot. If you grow herbs from seed or from transplants, you're basically saving dollars on everything you buy. So if you go to the store and you buy a bundle of cilantro or a recipe you may have, more than likely you're only going to use a small portion of that bundle. And then what do you do with the rest? The same with the plastic packages. Usually you take what you want, put it in your recipe, and it winds up in the refrigerator. You usually get lost, and after a while you look at it, it's all black and brown, and you don't want to use it anymore. Now the dried herbs, yeah, they're fine, but they have a shelf life as well. I know when I moved to Florida, we opened our pantry and we found herbs that have been in jars and cans, and the best use by date had gone by 20 years ago. So yeah, a lot of times you get a spice rack for a wedding present or something like that, and after a couple of years, they all look alike. So they're almost useless at that point. So I'm going to go over a few things that Becky Moreland started with last week on growing herbs in Florida. We have to know a little bit about herbs themselves. They're basically low maintenance plants, and they can tolerate a large variety of different types of soils. They're mostly drought tolerant. They like sun, but they usually prefer a little bit more shade. They're rarely bothered by insects or animal pests. The wife and I went away on vacation for 6 weeks, came back, and rubber grasshoppers had totally decimated our night blooming jasmine. And the deer who've been marauding through our neighborhood because of all the construction ate all my hibiscus. But none of my herbs were touched whatsoever. Now, there are herbs that are host plants for various butterflies. So if you like butterflies, plant dill or fennel. And if you like dill or fennel, basically plant some for yourself, protect those, and then give some to the butterflies, mostly caterpillars. So it's not difficult, and anybody can grow herbs. So since the ancient Romans first decided to make formal gardens where people would sit around and enjoy just being near herbs, smelling them, and having them available for their meals and things like that. A lot of formal gardens you'll find in Europe and in Asia, and they're unique and they are very pretty. But most folks are basically looking for herbs that can grow around their kitchen area, and they can go out and just pick what they need. I've given several presentations on how early settlers in Florida use herbs in their daily life over at the Manatee Village. And if you go there and you go over to the Florida House, they have a plot there which represents the various herbs that the Florida ladies would be using for their normal day-to-day use. So there are various themes. A lot of folks like planting for themes, okay? Medicinal, meditations, gourmet, crafters, what have you. It's just an example, okay? Now you'll probably be looking at a kitchen herb garden, but there's various different herbs associated with different types of themes as well. While in Maryland, I helped a church group put in a herb garden. I just happened to come along and find this information about various herbs and where they could be found in the Bible, chapter and verse. So they were able to put in a garden, put little signs up, and be able to show where in the Bible that herb was mentioned. I also just happened to find one for Shakespearean gardens. But whatever you do, that's up to you. I mean, normally a kitchen garden is very informal. You grow what you need, and you can put it in just about any place in your landscape. So we're going to be talking about growing herbs. To be able to have a garden, you have to have herbs. So we're going to talk a little bit about propagation from seed, or growing from transplants, cuttings, layering, and root division. So how hard is it? I mean, you just get a packet of seeds, you put the seed in the soil, you water it, take care of it, it pops up, and you repot, either in the ground or in a pot itself. Yeah, that's true. So let's start off with the packet of seed that you might buy in the store. Here's one called Elvis parsley. Now this is a marketing gimmick. There's actually no variety of Elvis parsley. But right off the bat, it gives you a lot of information. So this one says that parsley is a biennial, basically meaning that it grows the first year, continues throughout the second year, and then starts putting out seed. It basically tells you, hey, you can grow this in a container. Now, I always tell folks, if I have a choice between putting it in a pot or a container, I would do that instead of putting it in the ground itself. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. It also says that it has no genetically modified seeds. And it tells you how much is in the packet. And it tells you by weight. Parsley seed is very small, so we're talking about a lot of parsley seeds. And each seed has the ability to become an actual parsley plant. Now, the second part of this, it basically tells you that this parsley is Petrosolenum crispum. This is the scientific botanical binomial name where we're looking at the genus and species. So wherever you go in the world, this Italian parsley is known by Petrosolenum crispum. It also starts to tell you that it's a disease-resistant, full-flavored, and sweet, okay? And it tells you it might be difficult to grow. It might take 3 to 4 weeks before you actually see a plant emerging from the soil. It tells you just how far apart you want to put the seed. It also tells you how deep you want to plant the seed, and it gives you a range of maximum height. And it says you can grow this in partial shade. If you put it in full sun, you'll find out it doesn't do well here in Florida during the summer months. It tells you should soak the seeds and you should start 4 weeks before our last frost date. Well, those are basically instructions for our folks up north. And if you've ever grown parsley up north, you'll know that once it's in the ground in that first year, if it snows that winter, it'll still be there in the springtime. So it's a very hardy plant once it starts. It does not like be in a situation where the soil doesn't drain. Down here in Florida, I planted it in the soil. We had a large tropical storm come through. We had a lot of rain, and the next day the plant just started to rot. So you have to be very careful about being able to provide a loose soil that drains well. And when it says frost-free, just as a little side note here, in our area, basically we have a 30% chance of frost between 28 December to 28 January, which means we have 333 days of basically outdoor growing. So our big problem is in the summer, like right now, where it's overly hot outside. Well, I tell folks, if you have plants that are heat sensitive, before the heat arrives, you can repot or bring the plant indoors and grow them indoors where the actual temperature inside your home is a lot more agreeable to the plant, and it'll continue to do well. Now, the big thing at the bottom is package date. You want to make sure if you're buying seed that it is for the year in which you decide to plant. So if it has a range of 2 or 3 years, you know that that seed's been in that packet sitting around. And if it wasn't stored properly, it probably doesn't have a lot of seeds in that packet that are still viable. So always look for a package date for the year you plan to plant. Okay, so you get seed from a friend of yours, or they may have leftovers in a pack and they just handed you some seeds. How do you know they're still good? Or if you had a packet of seeds and you saved it for a year or two and decide you want to replant or plant again, how viable are those seeds? Well, the first test you can try, because they tell you you ought to soak your seed first, is what we call the floater test. Seeds that float are no longer viable. If they sink to the bottom, those are the ones you want. Now, very small seeds will probably not break the surface tension of the water, so they'll just float no matter what. An alternative is what we call the ragdoll test. So if you do a search engine and you just put down ragdoll semicolon IFAS for IFAS, you'll come up with a fact sheet or basically an instruction on how you can perform ragdoll test. And basically what you do is you take your paper towel, put some of the seeds that you have on the paper towel. I usually put down 10 because it's a lot easier to do the math. And you look on the instruction, basically it'll say, all right, 3 weeks, and you put the paper towel with the seeds in a plastic bag or a container. Let it sit for about 2 weeks. then check on it. Then check again at 3 weeks. And then you should see sprouts coming in. Basically, the first thing you'll find from a seed is the actual taproot. And if that's coming out, you look at the seeds and you count. In this case, you'll see that all the taproots are out, which means these are perfectly fine seeds, 100% germination. Now, if you had 10 seeds and only 5 came out, that means you have 50% germination, which means when you go to plant, you may want to plant more seeds than you would normally plant if you knew they were all going to come up. So that's one thing you can do. Now, the seeds that are on this paper towel usually get woven into the various fabrics in the paper towel. So if you want to plant those seeds, don't pick them off the towel. Just cut around or just tear around the seed and plant both the seed and the paper towel in your soil. Now, I always like starting seed in a seed starting potting mix. It's basically developed just for seeds, extremely loose and friable. It's been sterilized, so you're not have to worry about any kind of fungal pathogens in the soil. You don't have to get very fancy on different types of fast root development and all that. It's fine, it's not a problem. If it just said seed starting mix, that's all you really need. Now, if you look and do research, you may not find any information on just how deep you need to plant the seed, especially if somebody gives you a seed. Now, this is a fennel seed here. It basically, the rule of thumb is twice the diameter of the seed. That's your planting depth, okay? And the way you can do that is just do a quick measurement, or you put 2 seeds in the ground and you take the top one off. So tamp the ground or put it in your pot. Make sure you have full contact and the soil is moist, not soaking wet, but moist. Planting seeds in containers. Okay, about 25 years ago, a big seed company put out this product that you're looking at now that it has these little rubber sponge type inserts into this styrofoam. Again, this is a marketing gimmick. It never looks this clean, and your seedlings hardly ever come up looking exactly like this. But the roots would be in contact with this sponge, and underneath here you have a hole in which you basically set the styrofoam block into this dish of water. And what I used to do is I used to get a big container, fill it with water, and I'd raft all these blocks together. And I'd staple them together so they'd all float together, because sometimes if you have a single block like this, they get top heavy and they'll fall over. So I used to put them in the ground and they worked fine. But then if you have a period where it's not raining a lot, I found out that these things would dry out real fast. So the actual sponge would soak up the water and not be able to give it to the plants themselves. And then when I went to rototill, years later, these little sponge things would pop up everywhere. So I've given up on that. I still use the styrofoam blocks, and I actually taught a class on repurposing household items, which you can take any kind of styrofoam block you might get from packaging that you get from a TV set or something. Just drill a hole through it, small hole, and then drill a little bigger hole. And that allows the water to get into the block from underneath. And what I do now is I go out and I pick some Spanish moss from a tree, and I actually use that as a plug at the bottom. Put that in there, tamp it down, and then I put my soil mix in there and put my seeds in as well. And then when the seedling comes up, I just take a pencil, push it up through the bottom, and I have what I need. Now, when you actually transport seedlings from one medium to the other, and you have a small amount of roots exposed, you want to pick it up by the leaves and not by the stem. Because if it's a soft-stemmed herb, you'll probably crush it, and then it's going to have a problem. Now, if you want, you can go out. There's hundreds of different types of little herb kits that are out there. Totally unnecessary. These things range in all sorts of prices, up to hundreds of dollars for something that has grow lights and heaters and all sorts of other things that you basically don't need. I basically do everything with repurposed materials. Since we've been isolated and staying indoors and ordering a lot of takeout, you get these little plastic takeout containers, which are actually fantastic as a little mini greenhouse. You can fill it with your soil, put in your seed, and it'll contain your moisture that you need. And that way, once the plants start to grow in there, you're going to want to take the top off, thin it out, and replant. Just about anything can be used as a pot for seed starting. Toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, I use those quite a bit. They're quite sturdy. They last a little longer than the paper products you'll see on the bottom left. Basically, you just cut it in half, cut 4 or 5 slits on the bottom of it, fold it up, and then just put a piece of tape underneath. If you like a square pot, just crush the roll and then put it in half again, open it up, and you've got squares. And basically, you cut up about 1/3 and just put it together. The little products you can see in the store to make paper pots usually cost about $24 or so. What I do is I use a vitamin bottle or a medicine bottle and just take the paper, wrap it around there, and crush the bottom like you would on a penny roll, if you can remember what penny rolls are all about. And just about anything can be used as a pot as long as it has enough drainage holes in it. Planting seeds in beds and in the ground. I basically don't do this anymore because problems we have down here in Florida, or even when I was up in Maryland. So you usually put a little furrow down in the seeds, you kind of pinch between your fingers and put it along the line. And what you find is the seeds come up and you have to thin them out because it says so much spacing on the packet. You really want to follow that instruction. I don't recommend pulling up the plants you don't plan on using, you're thinning out. I usually use a little scissor to snip them out. That way you're not disturbing the roots of the plants nearby. The raised bed that you see over on the left, that's a really nice little do-it-yourself project. I can tell that these have been put in using transplants, seeds that were grown in pots. If you look at the center picture on the bottom, if you put it in the ground or even in a raised bed, here in Florida, we have these things called weeds, okay? And most seedlings, when they start to pop out of the ground, usually don't look anything like the parent plant. So if you look at that center picture, you're supposed to thin it out. It's like, okay, which are your seedlings and which are the weeds? So to get around that, I came up with this idea using those little paper towel or paper toilet paper rolls, cut them in half or whatever and stick them in the ground in the area. So if it says 6 inches apart, you put these things 6 inches apart, plant your seed in the center, okay? So as they start to come up, all the plants on the outside of the ring are weeds. Everything on the inside is either your plant or accidentally some weed that may have showed up in there. And you can usually tell which ones are the weeds by looking outside of that ring and say, oh, looks just like those, must be a weed. Now, I've had people who tell me that they've used this method and after a large amount of rain, it tends to biodegrade really quick. So to get around that, I've taken a length of PVC pipe and just cut it in 1.5 inches or 2 inches. An 8-foot section will give you about 50 of these things. They won't go anywhere. And you can put them in the ground, and there's not an herb that I know of that has a diameter that will exceed that of a PVC pipe. So that's an easy way of telling your weeds from your seeds that you want to keep. This is a raised bed that I put in about 10 years ago. Okay, and I'm going to show you this because the mistakes I made. One, I planted it near a oak tree, so I get partial shade where I get maybe 6 to 8 hours of sun. For 2 years, no problems whatsoever. Everything was growing really great. Then the oak tree grew a little bit more and I got more shade. So part of the raised bed was doing better than the other part. So you can see the rosemary that's growing over on the left was getting a lot more sun. Another thing I found out is that the oak tree took advantage of the nice soil that I had in the raised bed and started putting feeder roots inside that raised bed. Within 3 years, those roots got so tangled up in that bed, I couldn't even plant anything. So when we go back to, here's a great place to put it, yes, it is. So just know that during the year, the sun will travel at different angles. So I tell folks, if I had my druthers, I don't use raised beds anymore unless you have a perfect place to put it. I put everything in pots. If you look real close, a lot of the herbs I have growing right now are in these pots that I put on top of the raised bed just because it still has a good place for it. So with pots, you can always move it around. And if it's not doing well in one spot, find someplace else. If it's getting too much sun, put a little bit more shade. If it seems to lean toward where the sun is, put it more in the sun. This is the garden table. It's a design I brought down from the University of Maryland, designed for people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs, people unable to get down on their hands and knees and work near the ground level. It's great for any type of salad greens and especially herbs. In the background, you'll see little stands that were made to hold herb boxes, which is another great container for herbs. And off to the side, you'll see an old fountain that we had that Becky showed earlier, in which we have a kitchen herb garden. So if you don't have a lot of space in the horizontal plane, you can start putting herbs in the vertical plane, growing up. So on the left, you see that fountain that we repurposed and brought back to life. And we have just about everything you could possibly want as a kitchen garden growing in that fountain. Over on the right is a 4x4 post in which we have about, I believe it's about a dozen different types of herbs growing out of repurposed 2-liter bottles. And that takes up hardly any space whatsoever. So there are different ways in which you can actually plant your herbs. Starting herbs in water. A lot of people have done this in the past. It's a great way to show your kids how roots grow and things like that. So if you have some of this leftover herbs that you have in a bundle and you don't know what to do with it, you can actually put it in a glass container or any kind of container where the bottom portion of the plant is actually in water. Now you may have to change this water every other day or every second day so it doesn't get all murky and things like that. Once it starts to put out roots, you want to make sure that it gets no more than about 2 inches. And then you can transplant, always picking it up by the leaves and not by the stem. I personally don't recommend this because what happens is those roots have it easy. They get what they need and they don't have to fight for it. So if you're a seed and you put down roots, you actually have to fight to survive and you get a hardier plant. Once you take it out of that glass, those roots tend to collapse and you try to put it in the soil, you'll never get those roots to spread out very well. And as far as I've had, I haven't had a lot of success in actually transplanting herbs this way. So you can do it, but that's up to you. One of the ways that I like to propagate plants is through cuttings. Now, plants have these things called nodes where you'll have leaves coming out. And it's usually on soft herbs, wherever those leaves are, that's where a node happened to be. Nodes are like stem cells. They provide the plant whatever they happen to eat. So if an animal comes around and munches off the top, it wants to survive. And the nearest node will start putting out new leaves. If the node detects that it basically happens to need roots and it's in the ground, it's nice and dark, it's getting moisture, it's getting nutrients, it starts putting out roots instead. Now, I prefer clipping off those leaves with a pair of small snips. If you rip them off, you tend to do a little bit more damage on the soft cell stems. I usually take a piece that's about 6 inches or so of actively growing. Usually the bottom leaves, you basically want to get rid of those as much as you can. All you want is a small number of leaves at the top so it can actually produce energy for the plant through photosynthesis. Some people just put them in the soil and they do well. Others require what we call a rooting hormone, which is usually in a powder form. Sometimes it's in liquid. It basically helps start the process of growing roots. If you're using a hard stem herb like rosemary down the bottom right, what you want to do once you find it has many nodes, at the bottom ½ inch or so, you want to take your thumbnail or fingernail and scratch off the hard bark part so you get down to the cambium layer, or use a knife edge, and that helps to bring in the roots a little faster as well. So you always want to keep that moist. Once that new roots dry out, it'll never come back. So that's the trick, keeping everything moist. The way I do it is a little invention I put together when I was in Maryland. I used to work in the Navy and I had access to all sorts of styrofoam cups. And basically I'd sanitize that using a solution of 1 part bleach to about 9 parts or 5 parts of water, depending on how dirty it is. And then you rinse it out really well. So it takes about 3 cups. We have an instruction on how to do this at our plant clinic. If you really want to just give us a little call, we'll be happy to give it to you. And you put some slits on the side, some slits on the bottom. In 1 cup, you put in your moist soil. I use plastic straws, basically because they're sanitized and you can get them just about anywhere. And the bag I use is the one you normally get your newspaper in. Sometimes they throw it against your driveway and it puts little holes in there. So you want to make sure that your bag doesn't have any holes, just blow it up like a balloon. So if it leaks air, throw it away, use another one. So plastic straws hold up the bag. It basically provides like a little tent, like on a greenhouse. You wrap it up. And the second one I put down the bottom, you put that in the cup. So any kind of water or what have comes into that bottom collection cup. So normally up north, I would use warm water, and that warm water would stay in there, and the styrofoam cups would provide insulation and keep the soil nice and warm. Seeds usually only germinate when the soil temperature is at least 70 degrees. So using warm tap water, that's fine. The bottom area down here, I put that in later. I used to put a rubber band around there, but I have a cat. So what happens is the cat just like jumping up on there and knocking all the plants over. So I had to put this little collar down on the bottom so it would stand up and the cat couldn't knock it over. So after a couple of weeks or so, you might see new growth. Usually you pull this part up and you'll notice that the plants will start this part of the cup will swell up and sometimes the roots will come out. You know it's time to transfer that plant into either the ground or into another pot up. So you remember that rosemary that I had growing in that old raised bed, that gigantic plant? That's this one right here in the center. So yeah, it does work. I also use this in anything that's very difficult to grow, especially if you have seeds that take a long time before they germinate and pop out of the soil. I'm not one that likes to water. Okay, I have a lot of plants. I don't want to spend all my days watering. This retains all the water. The soil doesn't dry out and your plants do really well. But you can't leave them there forever. So when you see new growth, you need to open it up. Using a cloche, basically a 2-liter bottle, you cut the bottom out. Put it in a pot, put in your seeds or put in your cuttings in there. Keep the soil moist using micro irrigation or hand watering. You control the humidity by either putting the cap back on there and producing a lot of humidity. You can see the water gathering on there, and that water will drip back down as well. So this way, the soil never dries out and your plants have that humidity that they're always craving. A lot of times I just like putting the plants outdoors, starting without that. So there's a lot of cuttings I can just easily put in the soil outdoors. Sometimes if it's been in the little tent, I'll move from the tent and put it in here. Basically, this is a little container I get from the dollar store. I paid $1 for it. So cut out the little circles using either a drill and a pair of scissors, or if you're using any kind of a cutout circular drill saw, my tip is always run it in reverse. If you run it forward, you're going to crack it up. If you run it in reverse, it basically melts through instead of trying to cut through. This is great. It retains the water that's inside. If you need to put water in, you just pick up a cup, put the water back in. You can put your nutrients in there as well, liquid fertilizers, and everything you need. And you can move it about very easily. So if you want to transition your cuttings from indoors to acclimating it outdoors and hardening off, you can put it in this container and just move it about, getting a little bit more sun every other day. And that way your plant gets hardy and it's not basically jolted by this full sun that it has to deal with. Okay, seed versus transplants, okay? Why bother going through all this trouble with growing seeds when you can just go to the nearest nursery or box store and just buy one already ready to put in the ground? Well, that's true. The advantages of seed is that they're always cheaper. You get a greater variety. You get things that may be more disease resistant than whatever the store-bought is. And then you always have extras that you want to share with your friends and neighbors. And you get this sense of accomplishment of actually growing something from seed. Now, the next couple of slides are, I went to the nearest box store in their garden center, and I just happened to check to see what they had available. So here's sage. A lot of people like sage. Sometimes they only use it once a year at Thanksgiving. And that's normally what you'll find in your box store or your nursery. So whereas they only had one sage available, a seed catalog that I use had 28 different sage plants available you could start growing from seed, all having various different colored flowers, different colored foliage. So, you know, if you live in an HOA where they have restrictions on what you can grow, you can put this in your landscape and it looks just like any other flowering plant that you might put in the ground. Rosemary, 16 different types of rosemary in the seed catalog, only one at the box store. Now, the one on the upper left is basically called fox fern rosemary. So a lot of people in the developments put in these fox ferns along your walkways and things like that. And they have the little red berries, and the actual plant and the berries are poisonous. So if you're concerned about that, having pets or grandchildren and small children, you can actually just put this in its place and it looks just like the foxtail fern. If you have a wall, this is a prostrate rosemary. You can actually put planters up on top of the wall and have the rosemary grow back down. It's perennial, it'll last for a long time, and it actually puts out flowers. You can put them in hanging baskets as well, and they droop down nicely. This one, oddly enough, is called sagebrush. It looks just like a sagebrush, but they all taste and have the essential oils of rosemary. Thyme, 23 different types of thyme in the seed catalog, just one at the box store. Different colors, different leaf textures, different heights. They all have the exact same essential oils that you would find in the creeping thyme that you normally buy in the box store. Oregano, 15 types in the seed catalog, only 2 over in the box store. Different forms, little box shapes, different colors, different colored flowers. So there's a larger variety with seeds. Basil, 40 different types of basil in the seed catalog, only 2 at the box store. One was one they called sweet basil, which basically didn't tell you anything other than the fact that it may be a Genovese basil that you can use for caprese and things like that. And the other one was a purple basil. So again, you didn't know which one it was, so you have no clue. Mint, they had one. It said mint. Didn't say what kind of mint, just mint. Okay, so there's 33 in the seed catalog. Now you have to be very careful, even in seed catalogs. They had a large variety of what they call flavored mints. Okay, you can see them on the side. They have different colored leaves and things like that. So chocolate mint, I grow chocolate mint. And normally I get people to come around and I have them taste it and say, what does it taste like? And they say, it tastes like mint. Okay, that's fine. Then I go around and sometimes tell people, hey, this is called chocolate mint. It's supposed to taste just like a peppermint patty or those Girl Scout Thin Mint cookies. Then they try it. They go, oh yeah, it tastes just like chocolate. Wow, this is really cool. So, okay, fine. It's just a gimmick, and I've never found any of these, at least my taste buds, though I can recognize it as chocolate mint. But it is a really nice mint to grow, and I use it in various types of alcoholic beverages, okay? I tell people, always grow mints in containers, and then keep an eye on it. So remember that time I went away for 6 weeks? Okay, I was growing chocolate mint for our